one of the organizers of a group called Indy Energy. We were formed in 2014. We are based in Independence. We became interested in the municipal utility called Independence Power and Light. There's a variety of issues that have occurred in the course of the history of this municipal utility, which is over 100 years old. And Monday is a historic vote because on Monday, the city council has before it a letter of intent for $70 million purchase of natural gas, a couple of turbines. And so we organized this forum because the availability of our two presenters, wonderful people, and you will hear from them so shortly, for Saturday, February 26th. We did not realize that just 2 days later, there was going to be this vote. It's a letter of intent, just by way of background, and maybe we can talk more about it at the end. It's a letter of intent. The letter of intent means that they would negotiate. There would be later vote on an actual sort of contract, but the challenges faced by Independence Power and Light are not dissimilar to that faced by Ameren or Evergy or Omaha Public Power District. How do you shift from fuel-based, fossil-based fuels to renewable energies? And we just have two remarkably knowledgeable and great speakers. We're glad that they're able to join us and be with us.
Good morning. Thank you, Brent. This is Jeff Fox. I'm the editor of the Examiner here in Independence. We have two speakers this morning. They are Ashok Gupta, who's a senior energy economist at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and Henry Robertson. He is I think I had this right, he's retired director of the Climate and Energy Program at the Great Rivers Environmental Law Center. We're going to have each of our two speakers do a short presentation, and then we'll jump in with some questions. So our first presentation goes to Ashok Gupta. Good morning, sir. Please show us what you have.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks, Jeff. Everybody can hear me, I assume, right now. So I'll go ahead. I don't have a slide presentation. I'm just going to talk for 5 or 10 minutes. And I'm going to mostly spend this period to just step back and give the context that the decision's being made in, and leave to Q&A and other conversation to kind of get into the more specifics that you are all dealing with right now. It's important to provide context and step back only because electricity systems are very complicated and the decision-making process can be quite complex, and there are many players and many issues at play. Given my background in both physics and economics, I'm going to start with some basics, which I assume everybody knows. But electricity is one of those few products, if not the only one, that gets produced and used instantaneously at the same time, because we don't have a history of storage. The fact that you have this, turn your light switch on, turn your AC on, some generator has to be available, transmission, distribution has to be available. That creates a whole system of how you meet demand and peak demand. So electricity planning starts with forecasting demand and looking at what the peaks are, and then building your entire system to meet that peak demand, plus an extra 20+% for redundancy and reliability purposes, which we all want. So you build this whole system because of this demand that is ever present, and we need to focus a lot more on that side of the equation, and very few do. And my view is IPL has not really looked at the demand side of solutions whatsoever when looking at how to meet the needs of its consumers. So demand is a huge part of the equation, and I just wanted to emphasize that. Historically, you forecast the demand and you figure out your supply needs. It was historically coal and nuclear and hydro more and more, and then natural gas became more prevalent, and then more recently wind and solar have become more prevalent in terms of the supply mix. So we have a wide range of supply resources that we try to invest in, and these investments are long-term investments, right? None of them are short-term, and so we're making these huge investments. There's a lot of risk in deciding what to invest in because things change, and decisions that might look good right now from an economic perspective in 5, 10, 20 years look very bad. Most of our coal fleet right now is uneconomic and can't compete. Our nuclear fleet can't compete compared to wind and solar. So you have these issues that play out over long term in terms of the risks. And this is where having a portfolio approach and having the right combination of resources, including demand side resources, is critical. I'll come back to that only because consumers invest in efficiency with a 2 to 3 year payback. The utilities, munis, otherwise investor-owned, all make 20, 30-year investments. So you have this mismatch in terms of what people invest in on the demand side versus the length of time people invest in terms of the supply side. So that creates a huge problem, and we need to really zero in on that question. And especially as we move to more and more electric vehicles, we'll need to do that, and shaping the demand curve. So how much we consume matters, but when we consume it even matters more. And this goes to the whole affordability issue. So for a lot of residential customers who live in very leaky buildings, a third of their energy is probably wasted. So people are paying for a lot of electricity, creates a reliability problem. It just kind of begs the question, why aren't we focusing more on demand? We could probably meet 20 or 30% of our total demand through efficiency measures over the next 10 years at a much, much lower cost than any supply option we have out there. So we need to be, from a planning perspective and risk mitigation perspective and affordability, reliability, no matter what you look at it, demand is going to be job number one. And I think that's just been given short shrift for a long time. The second area that Henry probably will talk about more is, of course, storage. As we've gone to more wind and solar, and we know we need to deal with issues of storage, we need to have a strategy around how we invest in storage to help shape the demand curve even better in terms of supply options and deal with the wind and solar's intermittency. The key thing to remember about that is this goes to the Southwest Power Pool issues and how the system manages to integrate solar and wind. Is you can look at wind only and look at when it generates electricity. You can look at solar only, but the reliability benefits of combining wind plus solar are very high. And if you combine wind plus solar plus storage, so the Southwest Power Pool will be and has to look at the next 2 or 3 years is how does it value the combination of those things. And I know storage can be short duration storage, 4 hours, but a lot of utilities are doing storage right now. So if you're, again, looking at your investment decisions over the next 5, 10, 20 years, I think demand solutions and storage have to be a huge part of that if we're going to meet our various reliability and cost and sustainability needs. The third point, and I'll conclude on that, is really obviously goes to the whole issue of decarbonization and sustainability. Regionally, Climate Action KC, which Independence is part of, has set goals to decarbonize the power sector, decarbonize the building sector, and we need to be cognizant of that as we make these long-term decisions in terms of supply and what we're going to do on the building side and demand side if we're going to achieve our decarbonization goals. And that's something that obviously matters to people, and the decisions that are being made will lock us in for a long time to a set of emissions and impacts that we may well regret just a few years from now. So I'll stop there. I think the focus, again, my view is demand side management, storage, what happens at the Southwest Power Pool, and then being able to execute this stuff, these ideas, and make decisions and timely decisions. And this goes to the whole governance issue of, do we have the right governance system in place within Independence and IPL to actually be able to make these complex decisions? To my watching from the outside, it begs the question, how are we making decisions, and are we making these long-term decisions in a way that really achieves these multiple goals, or are we just reacting to one problem and solving it and creating another problem and another problem? And so there seems to be no real systemic planning and thinking going on in terms of how you manage a very complex set of problems. I'll stop there and turn it back to you, Jeff, to give it over to Henry.
Very
Now, I
good.
thought I'd talk about energy storage, because anytime you talk about wind and solar energy, the question always comes up, what do you do about intermittency? The fact that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. And as Shok said, we need to use storage as one way of smoothing out the peaks and valleys of this intermittent generation. Demand side, demand management, as Shok said, is one major way of doing it. The other is energy storage. Now we call it energy storage, not electricity storage, because electricity can't be stored. You have to convert it into another form, store it and reconvert it into electricity when needed. And this is done by, wind and solar when they're generating at the most favorable conditions, the best wind, full sunshine, generate more electricity than we need. So you can store it then and unleash the stored energy when the wind is down and the sun is down. Okay, the dominant technology right now is batteries. And these are utility scale batteries the size of cargo containers. And right now, the dominant technology is lithium ion. The price has fallen 90% in just the last decade. There are many other kinds of battery chemistries, as they call, that are being worked on, and many different varieties of storage. It's really amazing. There's thermal and gravity storage, and mechanical storage, and chemical storage. And the race is on to bring these to market. And we'll see who the winners and losers are. Now this looks impressive. I know you won't be able to absorb this, but every year the investment bank Lazard does a study of the cost of various generating technologies. And this is the one that came out just last October, the most recent. And you will notice that here you've got wind on the low end of the spectrum. Here's solar photovoltaic. And the next cheapest is this, which is combined cycle natural gas. That's the most efficient way to burn gas and therefore the cheapest. But that's not what IPL is proposing to do. They want to buy simple cycle gas turbines, and those are represented on this chart just by gas peaking, because that's the usual use of gas, is to just run when hours of peak demand. And that's way up towards the high end of the cost scale. Now, I had a chance to look at part of the presentation that IPL made to the Public Utility Advisory Board on Thursday, and I saw the slideshow they used, and there's a chart in there showing the comparative costs of the options they considered, including wind and solar. But what I noticed about this slide is it did not include the cost of fuel, and that is a big deal when it comes to natural gas. Wind and solar, of course, have no fuel, so that's a zero cost for them. And the cost of gas is problematic. It's volatile. It's been low recently in recent years, but it's higher now. And the future for cost of natural gas is on an upward trajectory. So let's talk here about solar with storage. Developers are increasingly building storage and solar together at the same time in the same place, because that reduces your capital costs 8%. Now look at the cost of solar plus storage. This is from a report from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And down here, this is utility scale solar plus storage. And in the lower left, it says that the cost of these utility scale solar plus storage fell dramatically just between 2020 and 2021, and down to 7.7 cents kilowatt hour. Now, I don't know what IPL's residential rate is, but I suspect it's at least double that. Now let's go to another option, that is a solar and storage PPA. PPA being a power purchase agreement. So you purchase the power, but you don't own the generating equipment. And prices of that recently years have been as low as 4 cents kilowatt hour. There may even have been cheaper ones that I don't know about. Now you may wonder, how is this possible when storage itself costs more than that? And I put a link in here that gives an explanation of why that is. I'm not going to try to go through it, but it has to do with averaging the price of the storage with the price of solar, taking advantage of federal tax breaks, and also they may be able to tap other revenue streams because there are services that sort of solar plus storage provides that can be compensated for on the SPP wholesale market. Now back to this, by the way, I want to this cost comparison is here an echo. These cost comparisons are unsubsidized, meaning it does not take into account the federal tax incentives available to wind and solar. So really, they're even cheaper than indicated on this chart. So I think I will stop there rather than try to overload you with information. And let's proceed to the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Sure, and thank you both. I think you've done a good job of, I've got an echo on this end, I'll take care of it in a second. I think you've both done a good job of laying out the issue for storage, but the proposal on the table right now is these gas turbines. So let's just start with this basic question. Given what we know today, does this major investment in natural gas make economic or environmental sense over a 30-year period, which is what we're looking at? Either of you can go first.
It doesn't to me. I mean, any resource planning exercise would not lead you to that as your first option. I mean, basically, Evergy just went through a resource planning process, and our consultants who did a detailed analysis as well of basically a 20-year decision-making pathway. And yes, natural gas may well be needed at some point on the Evergy system. After we retire a lot of coal and build a lot of wind and solar and storage, and there may be a need for natural gas to get to net zero by 2040 or 2045, but there's no need for natural gas on the Evergy system. And I would think a similar detailed analysis, the resource planning analysis, where you look at all resources, and I think IPL did not do an all source RFP. And so if you look at all the resources, look at all the costs, look at all the options, stack them in terms of what makes the most sense, natural gas is probably the last option one would take in terms of a cost-effective, reliable solution for meeting all of our, reliability, affordability, and sustainability needs.
As I recall, the Evergy plan, they would not be adding gas, if at all, until the end of their 20-year planning period. So it's no immediate need of theirs. Now, the conventional wisdom about gas is that it's cheap to build, expensive to run. And in recent years, gas has been cheaper because of a technology known as fracking, hydraulic fracturing. But the drilling companies were losing their shirts with cheap gas, because really it's an expensive technology. So fracking gas depends on a high gas price. So that's not good. And I agree. I think the city should have done a multi-source request for proposals instead of prejudging the issue in favor of gas. They should issue an RFP for wind and solar and compare them side by side and see what the results are.
So let me press you on that a little bit, both of you. Is it your view that if the city does this 30-year commitment, it is in effect saying no to batteries for decades?
No, I think what's happening is that people are going to be stuck with a very high cost resource, and it's potentially in future what I call a stranded cost, because other resources will be much, much cheaper. So the question is, we'll be stuck with a fixed cost, which may not be utilized long term. So it's really it's like the coal plants we have right now. There's a lot of sunk costs that haven't been fully depreciated. So what happens when you make a bad decision around something that's much more expensive is you still are stuck with paying for it over a long period of time, even as alternatives keep coming down in cost and are already cheaper now, right? So to me, it's good. Is it a bad decision now? Will it stay a bad decision? Will it become obvious in 5 years that it was a bad decision? That's what utility planning work that I've seen for over 40 years now results in. Things that look good at the moment can quickly look very bad, and then you're stuck with those costs.
Yeah, IPL has made allowance for adding renewables and storage at a later time, but wow, how would that be economical when they've already gone all in for long-term investment in natural gas?
This is a question for Ashok Gupta. You're an economist, sir. How do you evaluate the cost benefit of this proposal that IPL has? And specifically, it's projecting earning $2.5 million annually on sales. Does that look realistic to you?
It's hard. I don't know the specific answer to that because I haven't really done the analysis. I just know from how you do resource planning and you look at, you have a problem you need to solve, you ask for what is the least cost solution to solving that problem that meets your needs, right? So to me,
Right.
That analysis is what I'm kind of going at in terms of how you do a resource plan, look at all resources and see what's the most cost-effective solution to meeting your reliability and affordability and environmental needs. And so to me, on that basis, I just don't see how this makes sense. It can, in terms of getting a return on this, I mean, the question will be over time, what costs are consumers stuck with when all cheaper alternatives might be available to them, right? So its question is this sustainable? Or I'm not that there's going to be a bankruptcy or something else, but I don't see how you sustain this level of cost and be competitive in attracting companies, making sure your residential customers, low income, have affordable electricity. So I just don't see how it's sustainable over time. Whether it can pencil out in terms of a return, I don't know is the answer to that question.
All right, thank you. I'll turn for a question to Henry Robertson. You both kind of touched on this, but sir, do you? It sounds like you would favor, obviously, a heavier reliance on renewable energy. So, if you add solar and wind and batteries, do you think you essentially address the reliability issue and the flattening out the peak demand plus 20% issue? Can you say a little bit more about that and where you would advise independents to go?
Yeah, that can do it. I mean, storage is still a developing field, but it's increasingly reliable and cost effective. And as Ashok mentioned, let's not leave demand management out of the equation. You can do a lot to smooth out the peaks and valleys by just addressing when people use electricity, reduce those peak hour usage, and reduce energy consumption in general through energy efficiency. So do those things and you have a reliable system.
Yeah, on that point specifically, I mean, I on average of 2% a year over 10 years, I mean, I say 20 to 30% demand reduction of peak is totally doable and is the cheapest way to meet your demand needs. And it means and customers will be much, much more comfortable in their buildings, because if you're paying for all of this electricity and half of it's going out the windows, it's not even providing a good service. So you have this people being uncomfortable, paying a lot, especially during the winter and summer peak days. And the reason consumers don't do it, I mean, again, it goes to the discount rate. For consumers, they look for a fast payback, and utilities are investing in things that are 20, 30, and this is why utilities around the country 40 years ago started investing in energy efficiency. I mean, there were at one point plans to build, 20 plus new nuclear plants in the Northwest, and they decided energy efficiency was cheaper than building out the nuclear fleet, right? And so we've been looking at energy efficiency as a least cost alternative for a long time. And yes, I mean, right now in Missouri, the investor-owned utilities may be doing closer to 1% a year, but we have utilities around the country that do 3+% a year of savings, and that adds up. So the question is really, the question is, you can't get 20% in your first year, but if you start doing it, it will be an important part of your portfolio of resources. And for me, demand side resources, just like it's better than or as good as supply side resources. They are less risky, lower cost, good for consumers. And IPL has ignored the entire demand side of the equation. As one regulator once told me, it's like doing electricity investment and planning and trying to clap with one hand. How can you talk about energy issues or electricity issues and only focus on the supply side and take the demand as a given and not something you shape?
So let me put it another way, if I might, sir. If I'm hearing you right, there are immediate and measurable benefits to be had simply by doubling down on weatherization for residential, commercial, et cetera. Those programs have been around forever, but if I'm hearing you correctly, the city it would be money well spent by the city to do a lot more of that. Is that your read of the situation in Independence?
Absolutely. And weatherization is one term for the building envelope, but obviously there are measures related to, more efficient air conditioner, more efficient furnaces, and so on and so on. So there's both the equipment side of things and the building envelope side of things. But absolutely, there's a lot that can be done. And like I would, I'm a big person, believes in building efficiency. And I would say 20, 30, 40, 50%. And if you build new buildings, you can there's a new building in downtown Kansas City, Missouri that uses 90% less than your code compliant buildings right now, right? So you can do a lot on the demand side if there was a good focus on it, and the utility, and it doesn't need to be the city. I mean, the city/utility, the utility should be investing in it because it is the least cost resource, and it's good for all customers for them to invest in efficiency rather than invest in alternatives.
Overall, does the Southwest Power Pool do a good job of taking that kind of calculation into account? The what I'm calling weatherization, but controlling the demand side?
The answer is yes, because what you need to do to comply with SPP is meet your peak demand requirements, right? And if you can lower your peak demands through efficiency, your demand forecast is different, right? So all SPPs are asking you to do is meet your demand forecast adjusted for efficiency and comply with that.
Right. Nonetheless, there's a proposal in front of the city council on Monday night, and the city council, I think, is feeling a little bit pressed to act somewhat quickly because they have obligations to the Southwest Power Pool, and these turbines would be up and running, we are told, in maybe 30 months, something like that. If you're on the city council Monday night, what are the questions that you should be asking?
I would not say that we shouldn't do this. I would just say, let's have a more comprehensive plan of attack. I mean, I would not approve it without a serious demand side program at the same time and a serious commitment to storage at the same time. So to me, I would say if this has to be done, it should be done in combination with some other strategies. Otherwise, we don't really have a plan. We're just kind of, panicking and doing something to do something, but we don't really have a plan of action that won't solve our long-term problems.
Yeah, the IPL has chosen old technology, which could become significantly more costly in the future, depending on the volatile price of gas.
Do you sense this is a decision that they need to make quickly, or that they might have a little bit more time?
I'm sure they have time. I think they can do other things in the meantime in terms of even buying power that they need and so on. So again, I'm not an expert on IPL, but I would love to have the conversation to find out why can't we do other things and look at this decision in 6 to 12 months. But if somebody tells me that this decision has to be made today because we don't have 6 to 12 months, how did we get into that situation?
So the IPO proposal includes the ability to burn hydrogen in addition to natural gas. And one of you talked earlier about different types of burning natural. Could you tell me more about that and how those options might play out to the benefit of IPL and its customers?
Well, hydrogen is still really an experimental. The thing about hydrogen is that it doesn't occur in a pure state on Earth, even though it is the most abundant element in the universe. So first you have to use energy to separate the hydrogen from water if you're doing it sustainably. So that makes a demand on electricity, just to get to the hydrogen fuel. And that makes it questionable cost effectiveness. And it adds an additional demand for electricity on the system just to create the hydrogen.
So hydrogen is a great storage media. So first of all, hydrogen is about storage. It's not a fuel. As Henry said, you have to make hydrogen using either renewables, and some people say you can do it obviously using natural gas or nuclear power, right? So the question is, how do you make your hydrogen in the first place? And what are the implications of that to cost and other implications of making that hydrogen? So the question is, where should you use that hydrogen once we do need hydrogen? I'm a supporter of hydrogen, but we want to use hydrogen for hard to electrify processes. So if you can do renewables and other types of storage for power generation, let's use hydrogen for industrial processes which are hard to electrify. So we do not support using hydrogen for transportation by and large and or buildings, because we can electrify those end uses. So hydrogen has to be made from, if we're using renewables to make hydrogen, we're using hydrogen as a solution for storage, right? So it fits under the storage criteria. And the question is, when does hydrogen storage become the lower cost option? And burning hydrogen in a natural gas combustion turbine process, so you're basically using renewables to make hydrogen and then hydrogen being burned to create electricity, right? If we could do it in a more efficient way, it'll be a lot less expensive than that. So it can be done. The physics makes sense, but does the cost make sense? So to answer your question, burning hydrogen in a natural gas facility is maybe an option of last resort, but not a good thermodynamic efficient way to go.
I wonder if you could share your thoughts on electric cars, electric vehicles, as we continue to make that switch. What does that demand look like in the next few years, and how utilities ought to be planning for that? And there may be other areas of electricity use that are going up as well, but electric cars, electric vehicles spring to mind. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, they're likely to be increasing in number a lot, and that will add a lot of demand on the system. And one important way to address this is on the demand side through what are called time of use rates. So if we have too many people charging their EVs at the same time, either in the peak hours of the afternoon or the peak hours of the evening, that's going to put a strain on the system and demand more generation. So what the IPL can do is offer as an incentive to EV owners a lower rate overnight so that they can plug in when they go to bed and take advantage of non-peak hour electricity. And of course, there will need to be, a build out of infrastructure for EV charging, which I expect the private sector will be instrumental in.
So the key here is to shape the demand curve again, as Henry's saying. We want to basically lower peaks and fill in valleys. That way you can basically take your fixed costs associated with the electric system and divide it over more sales. But we call this beneficial electrification. So whether it's electric space heating, water heating, or electric vehicles, there are opportunities to grow demand for electricity, especially as electricity gets cleaner and cleaner. From an environmental perspective, we can see growing electric demand for transportation and for space and water heating, that would be good. The key comes down to was when people consume that electricity, and how do you shape the demand curve? And if the utility is just taking demand curve as a given versus shaping the demand curve, that's going to double or triple the cost of the whole system. And this is where I keep coming back to demand and efficiency first, and shaping demand curve by lowering peaks and filling in valleys has to be a critical part of any utility planning. And it seems to me IPL is way behind and so far even really not engaging on the topic.
Okay, I think that kind of leads
could become a source of electricity themselves. That is, they can be called upon when they have some extra energy to spare, and that will balance the system better.
Yeah, I think that leads into this kind of probably our last question of the day. And it's a very broad one, and I just kind of want your general thoughts. But given the experience that both of you bring to this, how are these proposals considered and evaluated by other energy companies, both municipal utilities, as Independence has, and investor-owned utilities? What's your take on how these things generally are evaluated, and what Independence could learn from that?
Well, the main way is through the long-term planning process known as integrated resource plans. I hope that IPL does integrated resource plans. The big investor-owned utilities are required to do that, and other utilities do it just because it makes sense to plan ahead. And Ashok has talked some about, for example, the Evergy long-range plan, and that's how that sort of planning is done.
And in that planning, demand side resources always have to be looked at on an equal basis to supply side resources. It's just kind of that, and the kind of companies around the country have been doing it. Certainly the larger public power entities do it. I don't know about all the small municipal and co-ops and so on, but this is a gap. And I think smaller municipal electrics are even more challenged and therefore more in need of having to do this planning, not less. So the question is really how to prioritize this planning, because otherwise, my view would be IPL's model is not sustainable. So the question would be, and the governance structure to me doesn't lend itself to smart decision making, it seems. So I'm questioning the governance of IPL process here and voting Monday on things which, I'm not blaming anybody, but I think elected officials to have to figure this stuff out quickly is complicated. Who are they relying on? Which consultant gets hired? And so to me, there's a governance failure to put a decision like this forward without really good, input from.
The cheapest kilowatt hour is the one you don't have to use.
Correct. And if we can get Ashok back, I wanted to press him before we wrap up on one thing there. I was wondering if he had a thought or two, if you're there, sir, on good governance models that do work at other municipally owned utilities. Did you get I had a follow-up question for you, sir. I know I said last question, and then you said what you said. I was going to press you on that a little bit. I wonder if you've got a thought on, for publicly owned utilities, municipally owned utilities, I wonder if you have a thought on governance models that you've seen that do work well, and if you could describe what those look like.
I don't know. I look at BPU. I don't think an independently elected board is necessarily the way to go either. I just think that at this point, if you have a municipal utility and you're counting on elected officials, the question is, are the elected officials getting the right input to even make the decision, like on even doing a good resource plan? And who are they looking to make those decisions? So it's not even a different governance model, but it's really who gets listened to and why aren't we doing resource planning is the question I would have. And there's no reason why elected officials couldn't make that decision and make that happen without having to be experts in this area.
Right. Okay. That's a very good point and a good place to leave it. We're pretty much at the time we had allotted. I want to apologize to folks who dialed in whose questions I did not get to. I want to thank again our two speakers this morning, Henry Robertson with the Great Rivers Environmental Law Center and Ashok Gupta, who's with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Thank you both for a lot of good information this morning. Brent, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Thanks. We will try to have this posted a little bit later on. It's a good conversation. We've been joined by people out of town. Our conversation is not unique really around the energy options. Our conversation really around governance might be particular to independence. And so some people have asked, is there an opportunity to speak to the issue on the Money City Council? The answer is yes. You need to contact the city clerk in order to be able to do so. Please stay tuned. Energy tries to cover these issues on our website. You can sign up and get our newsletter. We're a volunteer effort. So all the errors that we make are of our own commission. But if you see something that we need to fix, please let us know. I have been deeply informed by the conversations I've had with Henry and Ashok and others who have taken an interest in our community. And we're the better for having this kind of conversation. And we hope that it can be continued. So thank you so much. Particular thanks for Jeff for joining us. I think we're adjourned.